Hello and welcome to the Australian College of Physical Education. My name is Gareth Long and it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting today's Monday Night Coaches Club. For our regulars, welcome back and welcome along to anybody tuning in for the first time. And I think we've got quite a few people tuning in for the first time, so great to have you along with us as well today. Whether you're a regular or a first timer, we hope you enjoy what we have lined up for the next hour or so. We are, of course, here on Zoom, but we're also live on Facebook on the ACP page, thanks to the efforts of my colleague Michael McKnight. So the format for today will be as follows. We are going to start with some question and answers. Then our panel are going to share some ideas on screen. And then we will be taking questions from Facebook Live and from the Zoom chat function. So both of those mediums, if you can put your questions in Facebook Live and on the Zoom chat, then we'll be monitoring those and selecting some questions from there. So please use those. Then after those questions, we'll be saying goodbye to Facebook Live, and people here on Zoom will be going into the breakout rooms where we'll carry on the discussion. A little bit of change to my co-hosts today. We've got Drew on the panel. Warren is finishing up a coaching session, and Chris is on the slopes. So we've got two of our regular Monday Night Coaches Club family who are joining us to co-host today. So all the way from Western Australia, monitoring the questions on Facebook, we have a licensed coach, ex-pro freestyler, and owner of the Coach for Coaches, Sean Darcy. How you going, Sean?
Very well, very well. Looking forward to it, Gareth.
No, thank you for stepping in. Really appreciate it, mate. And all the way from Plymouth in the southwest of England, monitoring the chat in Zoom, we have John Dorr. John is an FA coach mentor and one of my rivals from a long time ago, worryingly in over 35s football. How you going, John?
Very well, thanks, Gareth, and glad to help out. Really looking forward to it.
I really appreciate it, mate. But this is a really exciting topic. It's personally a really exciting one. It's something I've tried to develop in my own coaching and teaching over probably the last 15 years or so. We know the English FA four-corner model has social and psychological corners as two of its key development areas. And we know that Sport Australia has social and psychological domains at the heart of its physical literacy framework. I think it's okay to assume that most coaches will see the development of these skills as an important potential part of their role. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce such an excellent panel to help us explore this topic today. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to introduce the panel. First, I'm going to introduce Ben Bartlett. Ben is an experienced coach and coach educator who is currently head of academy coaching at Fulham FC. Prior to this, Ben developed and supported coaches within professional clubs as part of his role as senior youth coach developer for the English FA. In addition to this, Ben has also been director of coaching at Chelsea Women's FC and football development manager at Colchester United. More importantly, Ben is also the first panellist to be making his second appearance on the Monday Night Coaches Club, having helped kick us off on webinar 1 all the way back in April. Welcome, Ben. How's it going?
Morning. Thanks for having us, Gareth. Yeah, you're going to realise now that I'm just a one-session wonder, so I'm just going to repeat all the stuff I said the first time. So
no one will notice, Ben. You go for it. It'll be excellent. Thank you. And joining us for his debut is Nick Levett. Nick is head of coaching at UK Coaching, where he leads the support and development for coaches and coach developers across the full spectrum of the sports sector and player-athlete pathway. Most people will be aware of Nick's previous roles at the English FA, where he was talent identification manager and national development manager for youth and mini soccer. And it was in that last role where Nick was responsible for managing the national development review of youth football in England. It's a pleasure to have you join us, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be invited. Very humble. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Drew Taylor. Drew is the boys player development manager for Football New South Wales. Drew is also an advanced coach developer and assessor and has a wealth of coaching experience in grassroots, talent pathways and elite male and female football across all phases. And our regulars will know that Drew is also one of the creators of the Monday Night Coaches Club. How you going, Drew?
I'm well, thank you. I'm a bit concerned that Ben thinks he might be a one-session wonder because I certainly am. This is about my 4th time, so we're really in some trouble, but we'll see how we go.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll start with the questions. and we'll start with you, Ben, if that's okay. We're talking about social and psychological skills today. So when we talk about social psychological skills, what are we talking about? And is it important for coaches to consider the social cycle development of their players?
Yeah, I guess probably quite vaguely, I guess any skill that helps you deal with the demands of the world are probably nested not only in psych and social, but also in the technical and tactical skills required for whatever it is that you're doing, and also the physical skills. So the four corner model has been great for, I guess, highlighting and promoting the importance of considering people's mind and thinking and how they interact with other people in their environment. But I think it's important that we're mindful about not saying I'm working in the psych corner today and that will be at the cost of other corners. The human system is connected, so if I'm working physically, it will affect my psyche, it will affect the way that I interact with my peers and anybody else that's in it. I think also probably equally important to recognise that each person will respond differently when the situation they're in changes. So some people would suggest that the social corner is the most important. I guess it's just important to recognise that if I get along with you in our environment and on one particular night you're not there, that might change the way that I interact in that environment. If the coach that I favour most isn't there on a particular night, that might change the way that I respond. So probably just important to recognise that A, we're not fixed vessels that never change and are always the same person, and B, if we're working with a focus on psych and social, it can not knock on to the technical and tactical stuff as well as the physical elements, because they're all hugely connected. So I think that would probably be, certainly from a personal perspective, an important thing to get across early on. And whilst sometimes a separation helps for people to perhaps, I don't know, shine the light in the psych corner, I think the risk can be is that people think by dismantling the system and putting the psych piece there and the social piece there, that when you piece it back together, all of those pieces will look exactly the same as they did when you dismantled them. But I don't think the human body works like that. I think they're hugely connected. So if we're designing any football activity, which I guess is the kind of premise of this webinar, we probably just need to consider who the human beings are in that situation and the way in which their internal system might function and the way that that might interact with other people that they're in the environment with.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, Nick, if we are developing those, and we can develop them in our coaching, what are some of the key ingredients of a game or practice where an objective is to develop players' social or psych skills? You know, what would the players be doing? And unfortunately, this is a double-barreled question. So,
down. Hold on. Yeah.
That's your first question. Second question is, if a coach is designing games and practices to support the development of players' social psych skills, what sort of things do they need to consider regarding their own pedagogy or interventions?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think the point that Ben makes to start with, just to kind of support that, I think is a really important one. And the phrase he used that was really neat was, it might shine a light on it, but you can't break it all up. And depending on the context that you're working in, depends on the psych skills that you may well be wanting to develop. So I work across lots of different sports now, and we can't just go, here's a model of psychology and impose that on that sport. Sport has to define what they want from their context, and therefore what are the psych skills that they feel are important to them. And then, as Ben said, use as part of a system of developing people. Now, that might be, right, we're going to have a focus on, or we think that leadership is important, or adaptability, or emotional management, or coping with pressure. It depends on the sport, the context, the level that you're working with the kids or players that you've got. So if you're working with under 7s, under 8s in grassroots football, it might be subtle different spotlight, as Ben said, that you place on skills compared to others because of the age and stage of the child. So understanding where the players are at and what they need is going to be crucial. And I think coaches have to make that decision themselves rather than look for something prescriptive off the shelf to say, well, all my kids are going to get this, because they might not all need that. They might need different things at different times. So I think the first thing is really, make a decision on what you think the kids need. Now, there's different things that you can look to. So things like the 5 C's model, which is Chris Howard's work from Loughborough University. It's a pretty broad piece of work that covers some relatively obvious psych things like confidence or commitment, some of those kind of things, which are probably good for most kids. And then in terms of the doing piece, ultimately, kids need to think that they're still doing the game. And one of the things that we kind of talked about before was that, is it on pitch, off pitch kind of piece. And all I would probably say is don't do it too far from reality. And there's a bit of a trend of different things of, let's send elite athletes off to 3 days with the SAS and sleep in tents and hope they learn mental toughness. Well, they might become mentally tough in that context to survive and get through, but that doesn't mean it's going to transfer to the context that they work within. So again, some consideration has to be given to that. So the crucial thing for me really is try and do as much as you can in context through the games and practices that you do. I'm sure you'll touch upon it in a bit, but think about how you as a coach work and what you're trying to achieve from that, and then how you go about structuring your pedagogy and the questions, everything that you use around that. But the crucial part for me also is, don't forget that these are skills that we're going to develop in kids for life. We can't just think this is about football, because it's not about. So the great position that Ben works within, a fantastic club that do a load of great stuff, they still have to accept that 2% of them are going to go on and be professional players. 1%, I don't know what Ben's stats are, but it's a small percent. But 100% of those kids are going to be citizens of this country, and we've got a responsibility to develop them to be better people. And I think whether it's in grassroots or in the professional game, that has to be first and foremost. So what skills are kids going to need for life? And they might be some of the ones that you focus on as well, because coping with pressure, having a learning mindset, being adaptable, having volition and willpower, all of those kind of things are going to be crucial for life. So look at what you need for football and what you need for life, but don't underestimate the importance of the second one.
Thank you, Nick. No, really, really good message. Thank you. And it's clear message from you and Ben there about not seeing them separately, and seeing it as as more than just football. And I think we might get similar answers here from Drew. But Drew, is there a danger? I'm being devil's advocate here. Okay, is there a danger that if coaches focus on those aspects, there's a danger that technical and tactical development could suffer?
Yeah, look, I'd suggest it's probably more accurate that by not focusing on those considerations that the technical or tactical could suffer. And I guess from there, it depends on the age and stage as to the impact that the social may have on it. But I guess where the question comes from that devil's advocate bit, is maybe like a misunderstanding or a questioning of, the question that we as coaches kind of like to ask and like to be able to answer of, I guess, like, what does success look like and how will we know? And success in this may be not as evident in the short term as some technical or tactical or physical gains. So I guess like Ben and Nick touched on earlier, I think it's increasingly accepted that the technical, tactical, physical, social, they're all linked. You're moving to perform an action based on some tactical, and that's going to be based on your decisions and how you interact with your teammates and opponents, but also things like your own confidence or resilience, particularly if things have gone wrong in a game, or how brave is a player going to be. So I think to link and have a transfer from training to the match, that process of planning, preparing, conducting, evaluating's kind of got to be holistic. And then it probably comes down to, I guess, the intentional and unintentional impact of both the design and the conduct of your session in terms of your coaching behavior and interventions, as well as what it is that you're doing. So I guess in terms of contact, that old adage of sort of show them where to look but not to see kind of rings true. But we're also going to need some tools to actually be able to help players if they can't find the answers themselves. And I also think that a bit like, and I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, but a bit like technical, tactical and physical, we need to make sure that we're not only kind of doing what we think or what we want players to be, but also helping them to understand what they are themselves, maybe fill any real fundamental gaps, and also trying to turn what they do have into weapons for football. But then, exactly like Nick said, it's probably more important that in terms of both filling gaps and helping them understand their strengths, that's also going to move into wider life and how they become a person outside of football.
Brilliant. Nick, something to add?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great point. And one of the points that Drew touches on there is absolutely bang on about your coach behaviour. So you work on creativity, which could sit in that psych skills perspective, in training all week, and you get to match day, and what you're looking for is the transfer from training to match. Kids start to be creative, they do things, and the coach suddenly changes behaviour because the score goes in the opposite direction to what they're hoping, and all of a sudden they start battering kids for being creative and trying to do things differently. And this is where we really need to think about ourselves, because Drew's bang on, that difference between your behaviours on training day to match day. If you want the kids to be creative and try stuff, you've got to be brave as a coach and not batter the kids on match day if they get it wrong. If they try something when playing out from the back, being a bit creative, you can't suddenly then lose the plot if you concede a goal, because the kids are doing what you ask them to do. So just consider the balance between those two and your coach behaviours as well, because that's going to be an important aspect to this too.
Excellent, thank you. No, and guys, jump in whenever you want, responding to each other's comments. Look, in a second, our panelists are going to show some examples of what they've been talking about. But just a reminder, if you're out there in the world of Facebook or you're with us in Zoom, get as many questions in as you can. We will try to ask our panel as many questions as we possibly can. So please get those in there. Just make sure they're related to the topic would be appreciated. Then more chance of them being asked if they're related to what we're talking about. Okay, Ben, I think we are going to share my screen and maybe talk through an example. Do you want me to do that now, or would you like to talk and lead into it?
Yeah, probably ideal to lead into it if possible.
Yeah, of course.
I guess the risk is, and naturally as sports coaches, as football coaches, we probably naturally do, but we jumped straight into the practice design. And there's probably some other questions that we might want to consider before we start to think about what the practice might look like. And I think both Nick and Drew have alluded to it about, I guess, what does your environment advocate? What is it there to do? What's its purpose? What things are you trying to achieve? Because that probably will inform what practice in the broadest sense looks like. The second bit is probably about what you already know, and I guess that's your own internal resource about what you might know or understand about coaching, but also what do you know about the other people that are in your environment, how they react, the type of things that are important to them. And I guess probably if there's a third bit, the third bit would be what might some of the players' needs be. And I guess as a consequence, they probably become our intentions. What do you advocate? What do you know? And what are the players' needs? And as a consequence of those being your intentions, you probably then need to be intentional about how you design every single interaction that perhaps supports those things to be, I guess, evident and maybe considered in all of your work. And as much as possible I think one of the guys asked a question there about being subtle with some of the psychosocial stuff. And maybe, I think we probably need advocacy from the parents and the kids that if we're going to start doing some of this stuff to them in some people's language, we probably need to be understanding that we're going to be sharing it together. It's an experience, and we probably need as much as possible the players buy-in from the perspective that we're going to be doing that. I guess the session that you'll show, all of these sessions are low resolution in the sense that they're circles that are animated on a screen. And I guess when I talk through it, my failure will be that I'll be picturing the boys and or the girls in these sessions while I'm talking through it. Everybody that's watching isn't going to have that understanding of that context. Their context will be different. So I think that's probably an important precursor to say they're just moving circles on a pitch, but hopefully it will get into some of the intentional behaviours that the coaches utilise in a particular moment based upon what the club thinks is important, what their current own resources in terms of coaching skill and understanding, and then what the perceptions of the players' needs were, and as a consequence a piece of work emerges. So yeah, if you're happy to share, I've got nothing else to say on that bit.
Okay, well, you can tell me when you can see some circles on the screen. It will start from the beginning. And this one is titled Under 16s. I will play and I will pause when you tell me to pause. How does that sound? We haven't practiced this, everybody.
Yeah, If you just play it and then once I guess it's fully built, just pause it, because then I think there's some additional animation. So yeah, let it go, Gareth, please.
Okay.
If you can pause it there, that'd be lovely. Okay, so this is our under-16s coaching team. This session was designed by a guy called Andy Joslin, who works with the 16s, so no way am I taking credit for this being my session. I think quite a few things going on that perhaps are relevant to the context. The first one is that this group, over the course of this season, have often found it difficult to break down teams that defend near their goal. We tended to have quite a lot of possession, often in the opposition's half, and tended to try and jam passes through spaces that weren't there, try and force things that weren't on, and often found ourselves quickly running back towards our own goal. So I guess the important part is the things that the players are experiencing and the things that are relevant to this particular group probably need to be embedded in the session. This isn't necessarily a session that focuses on playing out from the back or creating and converting chances. It's just embodying many elements of the way that this particular group and the individuals in this group, some of the challenges that they were facing. A couple of other elements on the kind of individuals. The number 7 right winger, really lively, great individual trickery, can find it difficult when the defenders are nearer to their goal and there's less space to push and run. So again, opportunity to blend in some of the kind of overall team perspectives with some of the individual needs of the players. System setup is largely to reflect our 4-3-3. So you would see that the red number 9 at the top is effectively your lone striker. Your 7 and your 11 and your outside forwards, if you like. Your 10 is your advanced midfielder, and your 4 is your holding midfielder. So even though there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, including the goalkeeper, 6 reds on the pitch, we can still try and get some representation of the 11v11 situation that these players encounter. So hopefully they're seeing similar pictures in a similar way to which they may see them, when they play 11v11 on a Saturday. Similarly, the opposition is set up to reflect a 4-3-3, so a back 4, but 2 screening midfielders. Again, a lot of sides that we've played this season have played with 2 screens, which obviously means that there's less space to perhaps manipulate down the sides of the centre halves than if you played with 1 holding midfielder who perhaps would have a larger degree of space to need to cover. One of the key things that this coaching team had worked on with these boys is about being patient and moving the ball from side to side across the pitch. So the coaches deliberately made the pitch wide, as wide as it is long, which hopefully means that because the space is wide, there'll be a greater likelihood of the players moving the ball across the pitch and then looking to go in. But I guess the sort of the psych, social stuff, if those things were to be highlighted, if you were to look at the text at the top of the screen, there's a couple of bits in there. Firstly, that this practice worked for about an hour, and the coach separated the hour into 4 periods of 10-minute blocks. Which I guess from a psychosocial perspective enables a couple of things. The first one is that they're going to be deeply embedded in this practice for a relatively long period of time. Perhaps goes against some of the kind of traditional views that we're going to run a practice for 20 minutes and we're going to move on. So I guess from a learning perspective, the players are hopefully going to get a long period of time to adapt to it and play. Second element is 10 minutes. Doesn't sound like a long time, but when you're playing 6v6 or 6v7 as this practice is, it probably feels like a long time when you get to 7 or 8. Particularly if the challenge point from a cognitive perspective is quite high. We've got a deep defence, there isn't a lot of space behind, there isn't a lot of space in between. Got to be really thoughtful and intentional about when we choose to go in and how we choose to move the ball across the pitch. And then the final bit that this coach recognised from kind of a game momentum perspective is that his condition was if you score in the first 2 minutes or the last 2 minutes of the 10-minute games, it's worth double goals. It's worth 1 goal any other time. And I know a goal's always worth a goal, but this group and a lot of our groups have found this season where you dominate position. If you score early, it's much easier to control the game, because when you're going to dominate position in the opposition's half, if you don't score early or if they score early, you can find it really hard because it just encourages them to sit back, soak it up and then hit you on the counter-attack. Whereas if you score early, we've often found that teams have to come out a little bit more, which maybe opens them up a little bit more to be able to play. And similarly, if you score in the last 2 minutes, assuming that the score is relatively tight, that probably gives you an opportunity to influence the outcome of the game, score late, control the game. So the white stuff at the top hopefully just gives some of the context around the way in which the coach conditioned the game. Hopefully the illustration of the circles and the lines on the pitch give you some sense about the way the pitch was set up and what kind of returns across the four corners that it might give you. And I guess from a physical perspective, when there's limited space behind where the back line is, so vertically, when there's limited space in between the defensive line and the midfield line, you're probably going to need to move the ball across the pitch more of the time. But also from a technical perspective, that will probably mean that you'll need to open your body up across the pitch to be able to see right and to see left, rather than close off only to the side of the pitch that the ball is on. And secondly, that will probably relate to more physical movement that goes side to side. So maybe more sidestepping movements, more sort of drop steps where you move backwards on an angle to receive the ball from someone in a more of a side to side way than if the pitch was narrow and you were perhaps getting more forward and backward movement. So I guess that's the first layer. And if you're okay to play it again, please, Gareth. And you can see I think it's Guardiola's kind of 5 lanes. It's not necessarily something that we universally advocate, but it's something that this particular coach wanted to use. If you're able to pause it again, that'd be great, please. And just challenge the players to say, try and move the ball across 3 of the areas before you score in the goal. Didn't mandate it, because I guess the risk is you mandate something to move it across the 3 areas when you're in front of goal and ready to score. All you actually do is make people make a decision that isn't realistic to the game. But perhaps moving it across the pitch, moving the opposition's block a little bit more may open up spaces to go in between. So something that coach considered might be important in terms of moving the ball across the pitch. And the final part, I think Drew and Nick alluded to the kind of coaching interventions piece. The social part became equally important in this. You play 4 by 10 minute games, and whilst the coaches are influencing the players during the periods of play, there's also then within that hour's worth of work, 40 minutes worth of playing, 4 stoppages of 5 minutes each, which enables the coaches to work intentionally with the players, and which enables the players to work intentionally with each other to kind of maybe slow things down a little bit, think a little bit, and whilst they might not be preparing specific patterns, start to prepare and plan some ideas that they may use as a consequence of their previous experiences, which they may then use in the second, the third and the fourth game, with the idea being that even though we're repeating the same game effectively 4 times, hopefully what they've considered from the first game with the break gets applied in the second, so the game is changing subtly or quite significantly from iteration to iteration. That's all I've got, Gareth.
Well, there's still a bit on the toolbar. Let's see what happens, because there's some good animations. There we go. Look at this. We might see a goal. I don't want to spoil it. There we go. Excellent. Look, Ben, that's excellent, because it really clearly showed how integrated, that is, that you're not just developing psychological, social, it's clearly integrated into the needs of the team and the needs of individuals. So thank you very much. Do you think we could do another one just to reinforce it?
Yeah, go for the Pete and Ben one, because it's got smaller numbers in it.
Spinning. Oh no, we're going to be all right.
Because I guess the risk can be that you see a kind of 17 or 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 player session, and the risk is that everything needs to be large numbers. There's nothing wrong with large numbers, but it probably will reduce ball contacts. It's probably good for larger, broader kind of team tactical stuff, perhaps not good for individual 1v1, 2v1, 2v3 individual type tactics. But that doesn't mean that the same principles can't be applied. So again, this was under 13s coach Pete Booth designed this piece of work. I was fortunate to deliver it with him. Just some really strong thought about the way in which he structured stuff, the things that he put into the practice and why he put them there. And this was, I guess, more, position specific, for probably want of a better phrase. The 5s and 6s are effectively the centre halves across 2 age groups. The 9s and 10s are effectively the centre forwards across 2 age groups. So you've got, players across more than 1 age group working together, but working in a way that's hopefully reflective more of their position. But I guess the risk is we can see position specific as being the 9s and 10s going off and practicing finishing. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I guess there are opportunities to match up the 9s and 10s against the 5s and 6s, so that you coach your defenders to positively affect the way that your attackers play and vice versa. So similarly, this one was more about playing forward. So you'll see the pitch is certainly narrower than the previous one, which hopefully encourages forward play. And across the pitch, everybody is matched up 1 versus 1. So hopefully, the sort of idea about 1 versus 1. And again, I'm not knocking 1 versus 1 practices, but I guess in any 1v1, there's something that happened before you got it. So someone's going to pass you the ball and you're probably going to need to release it either to somebody else or into a goal. So not be careful of 1-versus-1 practice, but just consider that if you just do pure 1-versus-1, there probably isn't a lot of receiving and maybe not a whole load of releasing, which if that's what you want, no problem, but just be mindful of that. So, sorry, Gareth, if you're okay to play it, please. Hopefully you'll see as it animates, goal at one end, end zone at the other. If you could pause it there, please, Gareth. So goal at one end, end zone at the other. So the whites effectively in the first 5-minute game will hopefully be practicing combining and kind of slot finishes into a goal. The blues, who are going the other way, will hopefully be practicing more 1-versus-1, facing people up, trying to dribble past them, or perhaps more runs off the ball to receive the ball in the end zone. So again, as a consequence of the kind of outcome goal that you place at the end of the pitch, perhaps provides the opportunity for people to practice slightly different elements of attacking, and for the 5s and 6s, slightly different elements of defending. Because on the right-hand side of the screen, the white 5 and 6 are probably going to be tracking runners, trying to get tight to prevent people turning. 5s and 6s are probably, at the other end, the blues are probably going to be looking more at blocks, trying to steal, those type of things to prevent the opportunity for shots to be released. So temporal constraint is just a constraint of time. So play 2 5-minute halves. And again, the coach is simple, but probably important, change ends at half time. So the players get relatively equal exposure to finishing a goal as well as finishing in an end zone. Although similarly, if you wanted particular players to focus more on running off of the ball, you might give them a larger dose of playing towards the end zone. Environmental constraint, win the game, score kept. Sounds simple, but I guess for psychological skills, winning's pretty important. Losing, probably similar. I guess getting a balance across those things, but also driving intention from a physical perspective and ensuring that the technical and tactical skills are being completed at perhaps match intensity. Those kind of things just enable that to I guess, be front and centre. And the task constraint we've spoken through. So if you're okay to play again, please, Gareth. And pause it again, please. Pause it again, please, Gareth.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just got to, yeah, fine, perfect. So yeah, just some challenges that the coach embedded into the practice. So in possession, 9s and 10s look for opportunities to come and receive defeat. And I guess when you're getting the 9s and 10s that are white going towards the goal, coming and receiving, they're probably looking at receiving to release into the goal or to their mate. The 9s and 10s that are the blue, they may be looking to receive to face up the 5 or 6 to get into some 1-versus-1s. 5s and 6s do, even though I guess their principal focus is about defending, we do, I guess, depending upon your intentions, do hope to support the development of defenders who can play and contribute to good positive play. So we're asking the 5s and 6s to spot when to join the attack. And if they do join the attack, for the 9s and 10s to recognise if and when they may need to provide some security. But also the kind of transition bit, what this coach was really clever at is that particularly at this age group, 13s, 14s, you probably get, I don't know, perhaps it's a generalisation, you probably get the largest difference in physical stature. You probably get the 14-year-old that's early developer, you might get the 13-year-old that's late physical developer. So you probably end up with the biggest physical difference appearing, which can mean if you've got a small blue number 5 playing against a number 10 who's a giant marine, that it's really hard for them to defend 1-versus-1. So the coach quite cleverly put in about interceptions. So ball side interception and score equals 2 goals. So it says to perhaps the smaller, more nimble defenders, you don't have to get into a fight with the big marine. There are still ways to be able to steal the ball and then perhaps initiate a counter-attack as a consequence. But also by getting the defenders on the front foot, it probably means the attackers have got to be really thoughtful about their movement, about their touch, and being really kind of thoughtful and have great detail about the way in which they seek to beat the defender or defenders. And the final part is just, I guess it's a psych bit, but I think it's just a football bit and a human bit. One of the players in this group, Luke, had a tendency, particularly when he was near his goal, and perhaps he felt pressure just to clear the ball, kick it off the pitch, or just clear it up the pitch without really being thoughtful about playing out. So the coach put an individual condition on him, which he agreed with him prior to the session, that if he kicks the ball off the pitch, it's a goal to the other team. And across, I think it was about 45, 50 minutes worth of work, he managed to kick the ball off the pitch only once. He found clever ways to roll out of tight areas, to combine out of tight areas, to release an 9 and 10 higher up the pitch. So perhaps just a nice example about recognising the perceived needs of an individual, agreeing why we may work at it with them, and then give them a purposeful opportunity to practice that. So hopefully 2 examples, one perhaps larger, more kind of team, tactical, this perhaps a bit more position specific, but still a bit more individual focused. and ensuring that the kind of constraint-led approach bit, the reverse constraint bit, that if you constrain the defenders, it probably gives a really good focus on the attackers and vice versa. That's it, Gareth, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Ben. Look, I liked some things in that last one there that really highlights. We can plan the session design, but it's some of the stuff around it. I probably won't articulate this very well, but the stuff around it, like carefully matching up players and considering players from different age groups and what impacts that can have. And then obviously your example of the individual challenge and the impact that would have on the players' psychological skills. So it's more than designing a good practice. So I think that's a really good example. Thank you.
And sorry,
okay, go on.
Sorry,
go on.
I should have said that those practices might work for other coaches in their environment, and they might not. I guess they're just an example of understanding what you're advocating, what you currently understand, and who the players are and what their needs might be, and that's how the piece of work emerges. Not just here's a playbook of a session that we just impose upon a group of players arbitrarily.
I guess that's probably even more important to consider with the topic that we're looking at. Thank you, Nick. Again, I've got something of yours to share. I can share it straight away, or you can talk a little bit before it, or I can put it up and you can talk around it. Your choice, mate.
Probably just a 30-second summary beforehand. There's no animation. I'm not as flashy as Ben. That's just how Ben lives his life. You see, I'm chalkboard for me.
Yeah, I didn't want to ruin it, but yeah, yours is chalkboard. You've gone right down old school.
It's because I'm just simple. So again, this is a kind of a similar thought process, that this is aimed at a particular group of kids. So my best mate runs a grassroots team. They're under 8s. Typically, they get about 8 kids training. They play 5v5 at the moment. They've got 10 kids in the group, but they've got 2 single mums who can't take the kids to training during the week. So normally they get about 8 to training. But this is as a concept could be used for multiple numbers depending on how you wanted to do it. And one of the things that they struggle with, which 2 seasons ago I ran an under 23s team, and we had the same issues. So I would have done a similar session, but they would have done it differently with them, which was communication was just a real challenge for them. So this is set up that is kind of covert communication as much as anything. And this was the whole session and where we went to with it, where we were playing around with stuff. So yeah, throw up my unanimated chalkboard and I'll talk you through it. So I've put the 4 of us into it. So the focus on this is on communication. And so one of the things that you hear a lot of people talking about is how you can't develop psych skills and in practices, or you lose all the tech-tact stuff. So this game has got loads of tech-tact returns in terms of where we build it up, loads of physical returns because this game is bloody hard, and there's some subtle psych stuff. So this is the game. So the focus is on 1v1s, and as Ben said, generally in a 1v1 you receive to start to do something. So the game would start. It's Ben versus Gareth from top left up there down to bottom right. So Ben would start the game by playing the ball across to Gareth, and then Gareth has got to go and dribble to try and score in Ben's goal. And I'm playing against Drew. And so I play the ball down to Drew, and Drew would be in a 1v1. So you're going to get some interference and people running into each other in the middle. So there's going to be lots of touches of the ball. There's going to be lots of 1v1s. If you score, you get the ball, out your goal, and you take it straight back down and you go and try and score on the other person's goal. Now you can play around with the tech-tact pieces of, do you dribble it through to score? Do you pass it through to score? Entirely up to you. And what you've also noticed in the design of it is my goal is a different size to Drew's goal. So depending on the individuals, you can start to play around with the goal size. So if one player is better than another, you can make the goal bigger or smaller, and you can start to adapt to the size of that based upon the needs of the kids. So 4 minutes of that, I can guarantee the kids will be knackered, because physically it's quite tough. A 1v1 non-stop for 4 minutes is hard. So you can change the times depending on the age and stage and maturation of the kids. You might do it longer for the older ones, depending on where it is, linked to game day, all of those kind of things. But that's the basic context. So if you flick to the next chalkboard, what you can see now is I'm now going to play against Gareth and Ben is going to play against Drew. So this is going to be game 2. But this is the crucial piece. Between game 1 and game 2 is where the psych comes in. So the kids are going to need a rest. So you've got 2 minutes, have a rest. But the crucial bit that happens now is the conversation between me and Ben and the conversation between Drew and Gareth. So it's now, what am I going to say to Ben? Well, Ben has just played against Gareth. So what can Ben tell me about what Gareth was good at? Or what did Ben do that was successful or unsuccessful? Or what did he learn from trying to defend Gareth when Gareth had the ball? Was he predominantly one-footed? Did he have one particular trick that he favoured? So you can start to kind of get those questions between the kids. And you can get the kids to think about what was the real strength that I bring to this that I might need to start to continue to try and do. But the focus is on that conversation. So I'm less interested in the 1v1 technical tactical piece in terms of what they do. I'm more interested in the conversation. So does Ben speak for the whole 2 minutes and not let me speak at all? Or is it a shared conversation? Or does the coach has to come involved and be part of it in how do they deal with that? So the crucial bit is the communication between the players at that stage. So it's the psych bit is the communication, but we're doing it through 1v1 practices where the kids are getting loads of touches of the ball. Next one, please, Gareth. So you can then build this up however you want to build it up. But we can then take this into a 2v2 game. So again, you can start to play around with what the goals look like. So me and Ben are clearly better than Drew and Gareth. So our goals are a bigger target for them to get the ball to, whereas we've got a tougher one. So we've got smaller goals to try and get the ball into. And depending on some technical, tactical themes that you might want to be working on, what does that look like? You could attack central areas, or you could have one goal in the middle, look a bit more like a traditional game. But again, you can link it to the tech-tac outcomes that you're trying to achieve. But at the same time as this, you've got another 4v4 game going on the other pitch because there's 8 kids. Now, then you might swap over. Drew and Gareth might go onto the other pitch, and then the 2 blues on there come down to play on this pitch. But again, it's the space between games where they can then say, right, what was Nick and Ben good at? What did they try? Did Ben always push on and dribble himself? Did Ben stay back? How did they try and play? What did they try and do? And it's those conversations that's the interesting bit. Because don't forget, it's on the psych skill of communication that's the important part. So the game itself is just a framework, which you can play around with numbers and sizes and ball size and all of those kind of things. But the skill is the communication bit between games. So before you go into the next game, what's the tactical approach you're going to do? So can me and Ben have a conversation about, well, what are we going to try this time that we didn't try last time? What was successful from before that wasn't successful? Can we try something again? Are we not going to try something again? It's those conversations that I'm interested in rather than the actual bit that the outcome is. And then if you flip it on to the next one for me, Gareth. So you can take that where you want. You can take it into different types of 4v4 games. But then towards the end of the session, you can start to have some different scenarios on the game. So the 4 of us that have played together are now going to play against the 4 blues. And so you can have 4 little mini games in here. And again, you can play around with the scenarios. You can play around with the goal size and all of those kind of tech-tap pieces. But so game 1, only one player can talk at a time. So we're going to nominate Ben to start with. Now, Ben might hate talking. And what it'll end up being will be a little bit of nudging that it might start to help him get a little bit more confident in talking because there's not a million voices going on. Or it might be that Gareth doesn't stop talking, so the conversation might have to be on the quality of the information that he's sharing to people, because Gareth is the only person in that game from the red team that can talk, and the blue team would have one player that could talk at the same time. So you can rotate that round so everybody gets their chance to be the only player and think about information and how they give it and when and why and all those kind of things that you can pull out, which all link to information and communication skills. The next part, all players must talk constantly at the same time. And then you can start to hear the chaos that goes on and the quality of information and what that sounds like. And it starts to sound like a bit like a zoo when we did it with the under-8s. And interesting, if you're listening to the Premier League at the moment, I don't like the fake the fake crowd noise in the background. I actually quite like being able to hear some of the stuff that's going on the pitch. So again, you can start to relate it to games. Game 3, you might say, is silence, nobody can talk. So what's the impact of that? How does that impact on players and supporting information and sharing, etc.? So what different subtle things do they find in terms of body language and cues and little signs that other people might not see? And then the fourth one I was playing around with is there's often communication from an external source to the players as well. So I got me and James, my mate who's the coach, on the side of the pitch just to be absolutely over the top ridiculous. So much information chucking at the players, hammering the players for making a mistake, all of those kind of things. And kids just looking at us going, oh my God, what's this? And we had a conversation at the end and said, does this remind you of any coaches that you've seen this year? And thankfully, James is not one of them, but they were like, oh yeah, the coach at this club, they were horrible. They were like, so we can start to talk about external communication as well. So that's it in a nutshell. No animation, etc. Sorry about that. You can flip off the slides there, Gareth. Thank you. So a focus on communication through very simple practices where the kids are still getting loads of game-like returns with lots of 1v1 practice, 2v2, 4v4, lots of game stuff. But again, you can rack this up or down depending on the nature of the age and stage of the players that you're working with. But the focus is on the communication, the conversations between, not necessarily the tech-tap bit. It's that spotlight piece that Ben said earlier on.
That's great, Nick. Thank you. And like you say, you can't separate it from the technical, tactical, but also the social elements there, really high in terms of the relationships and the collaboration and those aspects there. Really, really good. Thank you very much. Drew, over to you again. I'll be guided by you as when you want me to share the screen.
I'll share now. Better for them to look at that than my head. So there we go.
No messing around. Get in.
No, that's all right. Again, no animation, but we can develop the psych skill of visualization here. So that is good. So I guess while people sort of quickly digest that visual, so design process here was still have a high fidelity to the game itself. So I guess a baseline, score goals, stop goals, 4 main moments occurring, and then individual technical, tactical to outwit, outplay, and outlast. So still some sort of ability to relate it to sort of key principles of whatever the game model is that the coach has. And then depending on the age and stage of the players, it might be that numbers of players or positions that the players are playing in or varying their positions might be adapted. But I guess this is sort of a starting point. So, in terms of the practice itself, and it's got it there, we're looking to develop collaboration and communication in that sort of social realm, and then players being brave and resilient and hopefully also creative with and without the ball, and also to encourage that winning mentality through a lot of football actions and a lot of repetition without repetition. So in terms of the practice itself, so definitely not to scale, don't do 2v1 across half the pitch, but we get the idea. So basically a pitch that would be something like an 8v8 divided up into those 3 sort of vertical areas. So within those, in one wide area, 2 versus 1, in the other one, a 1v2, or whichever way you're looking at it, in the middle, 3v3 plus the goalkeepers, and then two jokers there, so one from each team. I've just put them on the lines in between, but essentially across each of those three small-sided games that are all going on concurrently, the players that are in each of those pitches would be lots of those areas. They're the pitch they're playing on, and then the jokers have the ability to go in and out of any field they wish to. So we're going to have these constant underload and overloads potentially happening. So depending on where those jokers are, it could be a 3v1 in one wide area, or it becomes a 2v2 or 3v2, or if they go into the middle, that's going to change the numbers within that game. Then all those games going on at the same time. So then in terms of the sort of that communication, collaboration, some different ways to do it. So timed games where, all right, well, this is going to be a 6-minute game. Let's see what happens across each of the fields. It might be that if you win 2 fields, then you win it. It might be that it's, first to a certain score on one of the pitches. So if it's all right, well, if on any pitch, your team gets to 5, that's the end of those games. Or it might be that the score is across all 3 pitches. So if it was to be across all 3 pitches, then it might be, okay, well, the 3 games are going on at the same time. And if it winds up at the Reds across those 3 fields have got to 10 goals. So now it's going to be, well, how do we have those jokers best influence the game? Which field should they be on at any one time? And then within that communication piece, so it might be that there's going to be communication both within the games and between the games. So, and Nick talked about it before, so it might be, all right, well, we're going to give you 2 minutes to quickly work out where you want to go. So now there might be a player, and if you're the player that's the blue single player against the 2s, it might be that if you're a really brave player, you might say, do you know what, leave me in here, I'll go 1v2 and I'm okay with that. And I'll just hold the fort here. I won't lose this one. You send the joker somewhere else and I'll only yell for them if required. So some players, and depending on the age, they might start to come up with some different ideas of how they are going to use them. Or it might be that somebody says, no, I really do need the help. And then we're also going to have this idea that both between the games and also within the games, it's going to be that verbal and visual communication. That's not only going to be the ability to talk, but also to listen and to acknowledge what's going on. So, that it might be that when you go into that 2 minutes, a bit like Nick said, there might be somebody saying, oh, the joker's got to be here for that, and that's how we're going to do it. It might be that as a coach, we then say, all right, well, let's think about the best way to communicate this. And within the games, what's going to be the best way? Because if everybody's yelling for that joker to come at the one time and be on their field, that might not be effective communication. A bit like in a game, so sometimes you're going to wind up in a 1v2. So do you need support, or is there a way that you can actually hold on and assess if there's a greater risk somewhere else on the pitch? And then, I guess in terms of the conduct, and we touched on earlier, it's not just about setting the challenge, but then being able to maybe offer some advice as tools to the players that they might need, but without explicitly telling them. So therefore, it's kind of, I guess, important to encourage the skills they're going to need through skillful intervention or not through intervention, I guess, depending on what it is that they're doing. So the first time between games, when you send them across and say you've got 2 minutes, it might be that you just sit there, and it could be a shambles, and that's okay, because they're actually developing the skills themselves. And then I guess as the coach, we're just undertaking our own kind of version of that PDE. So we're just scanning and deciding when do we need to intervene, and with who, and why, and what would be the best way to do that. And a big part here is also going to be that ability to control and develop our own psychological skills as coaches. So ensure that we're developing the kind of training environment that does actually encourage those players to potentially be vulnerable and brave, creative and expressive. So, but like Nick said before, it's no good saying, all right, well, that's great that person says, oh, look, I'll go and do it in that 1v2. And then if they lose the game and all their mates turn on them, we might need to back them up and say, well, hang on, he committed to something. So that's actually a great skill. Now it didn't come off. So now go and collaborate on how you can do that better next time. Or it might be that somebody's saying, well, I'm going to try and do this. So I'm in the 1v2. I'm just going to keep taking them on, and they lose it. Well, is there some learning to have come from that, and how can we help the player? And I guess even looking at, you look at that way that a coach can influence it from that It's going around on social media at the moment, that pass from the Man City game last night that goes like 60 yards on the ground through a whole heap of lines. And you sort of think to yourself, well, that, you know, if you're going to help kids be able to do something like that as a goalkeeper or any position, you're going to have to wear the fact that every now and then that's going to go horribly wrong. Or a Jadon Sancho, the most take-ons in the Bundesliga. At some stage, somebody needs to say, do you know what? You're going to lose the ball. Don't worry about it. Just keep doing it. So if you're in the 1v2 here, I guess the temptation is to go, all right, well, I might just have to defend a lot, but there are also going to be some players that go, do you know what? I'm not bothered. I'm just going to keep taking them on. I'm going to go and do it. I'm going to have that real drive and winning mentality. And ultimately, I think by helping them develop it across it, that can have some influence. And then I guess as the session progresses, come to a place where this game just becomes, we'll take out those zones, let the players go where they want. You potentially then go and line them up in 2 different formations against each other. So it might be that one's a 3-2-2 and they're playing it's a 2-3-2 or whatever that might be. So now that it's going to naturally happen and they're going to start to work on it. So when they do get into a game situation, depending on how you play and the opposition plays, that sometimes you're going to be in underloads, overloads, and when do you need help and how do you ask for it and how do you acknowledge that somebody does need it?
Thanks, Drew. What hit me watching that game there, or hearing you explain that game, is sometimes us as coaches, what we're observing. You know, it may be that we actually haven't got any specific psych social skills that we're hoping to come out of that, but we're actually observing certain things and seeing what emerges. So we might be focusing on the technical tactical, but we're observing certain social psych skills to identify what our players may need in those areas. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen there. So as I said, we've got a couple of people. We're really keen that we get you to ask questions as well. So we're going to use this time to do that now, and I'm going to start with John Dore. John, have you been hopefully, because it was your job, I'm hoping you've been looking at the questions in the Zoom, and there's some ones in there that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, absolutely, Gareth. Yeah, we've had a couple of really good ones. So I've got the first part of my job right.
Good work, mate.
The first question that's come in is obviously from Ben Rollison, and that was, as a technical director, how do you develop other coaches' social and psychological work within their own coaching practice? So how do you influence coaches to work in those 2 areas?
So I guess that's a sort of coach development question, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. John, who should we direct that one to?
I think we direct that one to Ben in the first instance, if that's okay.
Agreed.
Ben's smiling.
I guess the principle of the way that we support the players' development is not dissimilar from the way that we support the coaches' development. What we're trying to do at our place is ask the coaches and when I say coaches, I mean a team of coaches that are around a particular group of players, to establish some goals at the beginning of the season about the things that they think are important. There's a kind of overarching, fairly loose framework that Fulham have stated about how we may support player development. I guess one of our big intentions has been, as much as possible, to try and place player and coach development together. So if we're working on coaches developing social and psychological skills, it's because those things are important to a particular group of players. So in most senses, they're both planning for and responding with a particular group of players. And I guess there's kind of 3 elements to the way that we think about it. The first bit is to try and give the coaches individual responsibility to decide what's important, so that they're not only governed by a top-down kind of doctrine or mantra. They're deciding what's important, and then by them owning it and taking responsibility for it, you kind of sense that there's a greater ownership, a greater desire to lead it and drive it and to build the necessary skill to bring that to life for the players. So the individual responsibility piece is key, as much as possible for them to prepare work, to deliver it, and then to review it. And in particularly in that reviewing process, to begin, I think, as Nick and Drew have both alluded to start to think about what the intentions were within that session and within that particular event, and the degree to which those things occurred. Or at least were evident in the work, and then that may inform what we do next time. And I guess the connection to the third part, so individual responsibility, prepare, plan, deliver, and then review. We want to make a connection towards our coaches becoming more self-aware. And I guess the self-awareness piece is them presenting their work more of the time, both to the players, to their peers, to perceived leaders or managers within the academy or the club programme, with the intention being that we build self-awareness. A, there'll probably be greater learning, and B, as a consequence of me building greater self-awareness, my psych and social will probably be positively affected. So I guess it's perhaps a bit fluffy and perhaps in some people's mind presumed to be a little bit soft, but kind of ownership is probably the key part to this. Coaches owning their work and being supported in the degree to which they're supported to better understand what they're doing. And I guess my role, if I have one, I'm not a technical director, I'm just a coach developer, but my role, if I have one, is to better understand the goals that those coaches have committed to, the degree to which those goals align with the needs of the players. And then as they're going through the process of delivering game days, delivering training sessions, delivering analysis sessions, whatever it is they're doing, looking at the degree to which they're aligning what we said was important for those players' development with their actual behaviour. And if it's misaligned, it's not a bad thing. They're not bad people. They're not going to be disciplined as a consequence. But it's just helping us to build a greater sense of where they're at, and most importantly, help them build a greater sense of where they're at and where the future development needs might be. So I guess ownership, and those are, I suppose, the previous stuff prior to that, is just some of the tactics that we use to try and build responsibility and ownership with the coaches.
Yeah, great, Ben. I think a lot of clubs have these player characteristics that they've identified that they want players to learn and develop, but the danger is they stay words on the paper. So hearing you saying that, you know, the coaches have ownership to identify what their players' needs, I think is excellent advice. Thank you. Sean, now, I don't think there's many questions coming in from Facebook, so you've taken this as an opportunity to ask your own personal question. So, you know, we'll say that's within the rules, mate, as long as it's a good question.
I certainly have. I've been watching on Facebook on my own, just me and the cat watching it there, like, you know, but what I was going to put to the panel, like, do you think like that it's when you're working on the psychosocial, because like you design the environment so like it's a covert challenge to the players, so a little bit like Ben said, where the 7 was a tricky player but there was no space in behind so he couldn't push and run, so you design the environment to give them a challenge. Or like Ben said again, like the group challenge, the defenders can intersect so they get bonus points to intersect, or targeting a player and saying, you know, this is your individual challenge, you know, can you maybe get to the byline and swing the ball over, then a goal's worth 2. Which does the panel think works best? Designing the environment so the challenge happens naturally, a group challenge so a player doesn't feel they've been targeted, or an individual challenge?
Nice question about sort of the choice of interventions you've got in design and delivery. Nick, do you mind having a go at that?
Yeah, great question, Sean.
All of them. It was a wonderful question.
It was. It's definitely up there as one of the best questions we've had in the last 1 minute. I would say all of them. I think it depends on individuals and what you're trying to achieve based upon that session, because we can't see sessions in isolation as just a one session thing. And I listened to a podcast yesterday on risk and decision making, but it was about poker. And you can't just see one game or one hand unless it's the final of the biggest tournament in the world. But generally, your poker experiences are based upon over a long period of time and probability across all of those. We can't forget that player development is not based on one session. It is based upon a whole story. And sometimes we get focused on one chapter and one paragraph, but we've got to see the complete story. So I think across the journey of the player, we'll probably see all of those different things at different times based upon what they need. That's probably one piece. I think the second piece for me that's crucial is how we extract the learning from those different planned pieces of interventions that's crucial for the kids or the players or whoever you're working with, if it's adults. It's the conversations with the players that you have that allow them to start to make sense of it. So you can just hope that the environment gives them what they need, but sometimes it might not. And sometimes it might need a nudge or a prompt of a conversation to help them start to make sense of stuff. Sometimes that might be subtle, sometimes it might be a sledgehammer, because there is always a time, and I appreciate that we moved full circle and swung from this, real world of command style to you can't tell them anything. Like, you can help the kids. Sometimes that's okay, because it depends on what you're trying to achieve and how. But recognize the different interventions that you might use and know why you're going to use them, of course. But I think the answer is all of them, but focus on how you extract the learning from those moments, because that's the crucial bit. It's not the what you do bit, it's what they learn and gain from it that bounces forwards that's the crucial part.
Yeah, great. Look, I like the fact that we've identified there are a series of tools, series of interventions, and then the added bit there is that again, going back to Ben's point, the responsibility of the coach to select the right one at the right time for the right person. That's really good. Thank you, Nick. John, have we got maybe one more question from our audience before we go into some breakout rooms?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to put this one to Nick this time, if that's okay. It's very topical from David Stadden. How do you think COVID-19 will affect the way that we work socially and psychologically with our players? Now, David's actually got his first session back this evening, and he said he's quite conscious of the mental overload on the players. So I wonder if Nick could just give us some insight on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, John. It's a brilliant question. I am struggling with the logic in this country that getting the pubs open is more important than the well-being of young people. I can't understand why we think, and I get the economy and financial nonsense that sits behind it, but it's hugely, hugely important. And when we start to look at, for example, teenagers and adolescents, so kind of 14 to 20, 22, 23, this is a crucial period for them in kind of forming their own self-identity, finding their place, being part of belonging. Kids at that nature are kind of quite tribal, and they want to find the tribe that they belong in. And their mental health and well-being, when they haven't had their kind of normal way of socializing, is going to be challenged. So, I mean, thankfully, and I get the downside, social media would have been a useful thing to keep kids in contact with each other. But depending on the age and stage of the kid, again, I mean, the first thing I would do when I get the kids together is nothing. I mean, I would probably get the kids just chatting and reconnecting on a human level, because often teams are made up of disparate kids from different places that might not be their real close friendship circle. The first thing is just reconnecting and understanding where those kids are at. I mean, I would start to get the kids to share what lockdown's been like for them. You know, what have they found easy? What have they found hard? You know, I'm curious about how you approach that, and start to get a real good understanding of those kids and their experiences. So I was speaking to a coach at an academy, and he said that some of the coaches were battering their parents because their son hadn't been on the PMA, this computer system that academies use. Their son had not been on the PMA for 4 days. I'm like, well, like, mum and dad might have been furloughed or lost their jobs. You know, getting their son to log into a computer system every day might not be high on their priorities. And we have to get an understanding of where and what their life has been like before we can start with the football bit. So I would start to reconnect from an understanding and a well-being perspective, first of all. And then there's loads of things flying around on social media world at the moment about socially distanced practice sessions, and try and avoid the Gareth's favourite isolated drills, or just running them to death. Try and avoid those bits as well. But I would start with them as people. And you might even share your experiences. You know, part of coaching is about the coach being vulnerable. So, you know, I might share that, you know, for me, having a 6-year-old during lockdown and trying to work full time has been a shambles. It's been really hard. And opening yourself up and sharing some of those experiences, but connect with the kids first. Forget the football bit first. Connect with the kids. And then you can start to help the kids slowly re-engage with sport. That would be my view anyway. Other people might have an entirely different take on it.
No, look, I wholeheartedly agree, Nick. I think, you know, kids have had a lot of individual skills training sort of Zoom sessions and stuff like that. But what they haven't had is that connection, and that's got to be the priority. And I actually think, from my experience here in Australia, that's been done pretty well. So good luck, David. Hope it goes well. But okay. What I would like to do is I'd like to maybe have two people give a real quick summary of the discussion in the room. Maybe the main takeaway or the thing that caused the biggest discussion is absolutely fine. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague John Dorr, who is going to select someone.
Yeah, if I could select Bob Jarman and Jamie Morrison-Hill. We had the privilege of having two secondary school PE teachers in the room, and it was very interesting to see how the ownership and the transferables across different sports came out. So if those two people would kindly share that discussion.
Are we giving them 15 seconds each, are we?
I guess so.
Bob, we heard from Jamie Morrison-Hill last week, so we'll go with you, Bob.
I'm a bit gobby, so that's a bit of a problem, 15. Straight away, because as I said to the lads, I'm on my own here. I went to go back to New Zealand, so I don't see anybody. I talk a lot. I was at one stage. I was the head of PE and sports master in a top boys school in Auckland, New Zealand. It's now co-ed, and I wanted to change things. So I joined a sport education program, which was then the Hillary Commission, now New Zealand Sport. And we took all the fifth formers, which I'm not sure what it is in this country, year 11, perhaps, or 10 even, I don't know. And one of the reasons why, one of my rationales is that we had a lot of very formal, old-fashioned teachers who, when they coached the kids, they were hopeless. And I wanted the kids to take over. So we taught them, we put them into teams. They had their own manager, their own coach, their own physio, everything. They looked after everything. And the transfer was that when the following year, when they went to what we call year 11 now in New Zealand, year 12, they actually started to say to teachers, "It's all right, sir, we've been coaching last year, we'll take over, we'll do this, we'll look after it." And they took a lot of ownership. And this was like 1992, it's a long time ago. And it affected me as a teacher as well. I ended up being a university teacher where I took up constraint-led coaching based on this philosophy of that players have a lot of ownership. They know a lot of stuff that we can help them develop. So I think it just fitted in with what was the conversation there.
Thank you, Bob. And it is, we shouldn't assume that education and PE teachers do this all the time. I speak from my own personal judgment. It took me probably 3 years of PE teaching before I realised I could have an impact on these skills rather than just the technical and tactical. So we shouldn't assume that teaching always gets it right. Jamie, I would love to hear from you. I know this is something that you're very passionate about in your teaching and coaching. But if you could share any of your observations around that would be great.
Gareth, we spoke, or sort of I did it. I think the teaching element has opened my eyes in terms of my coaching as well. And I think Nick mentioned it with a couple of single mums, in that what these kids are facing before they get in front of us sometimes. And certainly sort of from a pastoral role that I do at school now, in that, the 12, the 14, the 30 kids that you may have in front of you, some of their backgrounds and the journeys that they're traveling on are so vast, and that has a major impact on their social ability and their psych ability as well. I'll put a little thing in there. I've been back at school, and I am noticing such a worry in a high number of kids in terms of their mental health coming back to us. And we started our coaching last week in the grassroots, and one kid said to me he'd not done one piece of exercise in the 3 months, and he had just spent his time on Fortnite. And we're getting a real mix of that. So I do worry in terms of the mental health, the social bit that this is going to have had on the children coming into us at all ages as well. But I'll flip that, and I've also had major positives where some parents have had their kids back because they've been away from the peer group pressure and the having to live up to certain things, certainly at the 14 and 15 age group. So for some, they flourished in this lockdown. So hopefully for coaches, they'll get that element as well.
Yeah, and we don't. I think probably from my point of view, coaches shouldn't feel that they're the people that have to solve this, but certainly being aware of it and recognising where you can have a positive impact is something that's really worthwhile knowing. It took me a few years to realise. Thank you, guys. Sean, anything that anyone that you'd like to ask the feedback from your group?
No, nobody really wanted to join in and say anything, but because we had one fella on a train, so he was But we had one of the people in the group was actually had a son who was in the academy system, and he wasn't actually coaching yet. But the reason he's listened to this webinar is because he felt there wasn't enough emphasis on the psychosocial during his son's progression through the academy system. So it's quite interesting from what you're saying there about how your story is quite similar to mine, that I didn't realise I wasn't even trying for any impact on the psychosocial corner when I first started. And everybody normally starts off looking at tech tac. And it's interesting to see somebody who's coming in from day one thinking about the psychosocial corner. So that was kind of where the discussion went. It was quite interesting.
Thanks, Sean. Hey, right, I'm gonna finish with one last question, and it's something that we've done the last few weeks that I always forget to tell the panelists about. But Nick and Drew and Ben, if you're still there, this is a new feature where the panelists get to ask one of the other panelists a question. So it normally works. Who jumps in first and asks the question doesn't have to answer the question. So I will shut up and listen.
I'm going to go.
I knew you would, Drew. Good man. So
Nick
Drew,
tried to, but he was still muted, so unlucky. But
I couldn't find it quick enough. Unmute.
No, it might be one for you, Nick. Actually, now that you've come out of football or sideways from football, or whatever. So, are there any sports that are doing this stuff really well, in your opinion? And if so, maybe who?
I think the two that I think are having a good go at this, one from a team sport perspective is GB Hockey. I think they're really considering the coach development angle and creating real kind of individual centered environments that will focus on this. I think they're doing it well. And then the other one from a coach development perspective that's linked to the coaching environment in high performance is canoeing. Not a sport that when I worked in football, everyone would have gone, oh yeah, let's go look at canoeing and see what we can learn from them. But they're actually doing some really cool stuff with, individual learner programs for coaches, which ultimately impact. So if you want to be a coach in canoe, you can pick, well, I want to be a slalom coach, or I want to be an open water coach, and you can pick and develop the coach development route for you based upon your needs. So I would say they're probably two that are doing this pretty well at the moment.
Brilliant.
I'm going to throw on to Ben.
I'll go on then. See, if our panelists are happy to stay, that's all good.
Yeah, I have got to dive off. I'm unprepared for a call at 10, but hey ho. Ben, what book have you gifted the most to other people? Or if you haven't bought it for them, what have you said or shared as being an important one that you might want to consider reading?
There's probably two books that have influenced me most, which perhaps isn't helpful because the things that influence you aren't necessarily the things that will influence other people. But the first one is by a guy called Gary Klein, which is called Streetlights and Shadows, which talks about decision making in what he would call adaptive environments. So he looks at largely people that have developed a high degree of expertise by being in their particular context, and how a lot of their decision making doesn't necessarily become second nature, but is largely intuitive and instinctive based upon the mental models that they've built as a consequence of all of the things that they've experienced and reflected upon as a consequence. That's quite a nice, I guess it references quite a lot of academic stuff, but it does it in quite a, I found it relatively easy to read. I'm not one to sit and read papers, but I'm interested in stuff. And the second one, kind of from a leadership perspective, is a book called Quiet by a lady called Susan Cain, which kind of talks about personality as a big factor, like genetic personality and how that develops over time, and perhaps the way that we behave, and perhaps challenges some of kind of the conventional wisdom about sort of strong leaders being quite charismatic, being quite outgoing, having quite a lot to say, which probably from a personal perspective connected with my flawed personality. So they'd be the main two.
Ben, I suppose I should give you the opportunity to ask the final question, but I'm not going to make you think of one on the spot. But you're more than welcome to ask one for Drew or Nick or any of the audience.
I don't know that I've got one. I'd probably be busking a little bit, and I'm not sure that would be seeing me at my strongest, if there is such a thing.
That's absolutely fine, Ben. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Thank you. Look, I'm going to show my screen for one final time just to signpost people to a couple of things, really. The first one is that we are continuing the Monday Night Coaches Club, but we are going to go monthly. So our next one will be in early August, date to be confirmed. At the moment, this is accurate, but of course it could change. At the moment, we're hopeful that we're going to have Dan Machici and Tanya Oxtenby and Christopher Adams joining us around developing the environment culture, which is obviously very linked to what we've been looking at today, or certainly linked partly to what we've been looking at today. But any of those things may and probably will change. So of course we will be publicising that when we've got firmer details. So all that remains for me to do tonight is to say a massive thank you to Ben, Nick and Drew for giving up so much of your time, and not just the time here today. I know preparation goes into these things when you're a panelist on there. You know, I'm sure you're all very good enough to wing it, but I certainly know that preparation goes into it. So we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your insight, and most importantly, we appreciate you saying yes to our invitation. So thank you very much for again supporting coaches in their understanding and their development. Thanks, Drew.
That's a pleasure. Yes, I got no choice in being here, but I enjoyed it as always.
Well, I just assumed you turned down Chris's offer to go to the slopes with him, but if you didn't, that's really appreciated. And Ben, thank you very much for not disliking the first time so much that you agreed to come on again. Really appreciate that.
For having me. Thank you.
And Nick, great to see you again, and always a pleasure to listen to you and learn from you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, good to see you all.
Brilliant. And again, everybody that stayed on the webinar, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully we will see you again next month, where we discuss another topic related to coaching. Have a good rest of your day, everybody, whether you're the morning or the evening. Have a great time, and thank you very much for your time.